All right, let's call the meeting to order for the Light Board on September 14th, 2022. So first thing is upcoming meetings. So we have September 14th today. Then we have October 12th, November 9th, and December 14th. Anyone have any conflicts with those dates? We're pretty good. It's a standard times that we meet.
Yeah, and I'll release the 2023 dates coming up here shortly.
Great. Next we have meeting minutes, and I know that we have a set of minutes ready to approve. Pam, do you want to take it from here on going over the minutes?
Well, I just wanted to, as I said, as I've reported to you guys, I was unable to attend our last meeting, but I had received no comments after having made edits and consulted with Laura Scott. Thank you, Laura, on the content of it. So I sent them in, and I suggested you guys approve them or vote on them. And I don't know what the status of that is because I wasn't at the meeting, but I think
so
those
we
are
did not.
okay. And the remaining minutes have yet to be submitted to me minutes even prior to the last meeting have not been submitted. And as I said, I had a conversation with Karen Farrow. I think things are going to get back on track somewhat. I remain, and I don't think this is Karen's issue. I think it's not her issue. It's beyond her, but I think we do have lags in meeting minutes that are normally not acceptable in most boards. So I hope we will move that along as best we can here.
Yeah. I want to ask, so which set of minutes do you feel you're ready to propose we vote on? The August 17th or June 22nd?
It's the prior, I think I don't have my notes in front of me on this, but it certainly isn't August. It's whatever I submitted to you guys before the last time, and I'm sorry, but I don't want to fool with my my Zoom operation here. Wendy, do you happen to have I would have.
I believe it was June.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I talked to Karen about August. They're not ready yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we're a couple behind here.
It's the June 22nd minutes, Pam, that you had drafted, and I think we're ready for a vote, but we didn't vote on last month rather.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Wendy. Sorry I didn't have my stuff in front of me. But yeah, so we're behind. And again, I had a good conversation with Karen.
Okay.
I continue to think that we have, as a responsible board, and since I'm in charge of the minutes this year, I just think that we need to keep on it.
Correct. I'm going to ask if any board members want to comment on the June 22nd minutes, if you could raise your hand. If not, I'll ask for a motion. Alice.
I just want to make sure everybody knows the June 22nd was a special meeting, and it was on it was a rate hearing that I believe we also had an earlier meeting that month, and I don't think we approved the earlier meeting. Is that right?
I'm not up to date on which minutes.
I think the last was maybe June 8th, but
I think there was June 8th, and then we had a rate hearing on June 22nd. So the rate hearing minutes in my notes, I mean, they look fine, but I wonder I hate to delay it another month, but since we're not sure what we're voting on and what was last voted on, perhaps we should just go back and do that and be ready for next month with June and July.
Sure, absolutely. And hope that we get more in. That's good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we keep it moving.
Yeah, so I was ready for the June 22nd, but if others are not ready, I'm totally okay with punting to the next meeting. But we'll work on getting that backlog cleared for the next meeting. So expect a good number of minutes. All right.
And we should all go back and look at those minutes, but I think I agree that they're ready, but I just think we should all be on the same page to
Yep.
know what we're approving.
Yeah, that's fine. Nobody commented after I requested comments.
Yep.
I didn't see anything worth commenting on. All right.
Right.
Right
Okay,
along.
I'm going to move on to chair's update. I actually don't have any real things to update on. I did forward an email about affordable housing forum that was requested to be sent to members. That is happening tonight. So check your email and RSVP if you'd like to attend that event. Other than that, I don't have a lot of direct chairs business that's not going to be covered in the agenda. So I'm going to move on to Dave. Dave, you ready to give a director's update?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
So to date, we've paid out $184,000 in residential heat pump rebates. Really good number. Things are moving along. If you looked at our forecasted expenditures, we were looking at 153 for the year. So we're well above that. Kind of reminds me of the solar rebates way back a number of years ago. It's kind of following the same trend. So we'll have to keep our eye on that. And, you know, when we go to forecast for 2023, we're going to have to take that into consideration and kind of adjust. But so far, we're off to a good start. Staffs and volunteers will be participating in 3 community events this fall. Participated in Ag Day on the 10th, Vero Farm Days on the 17th, and Discover West Concord Day on October 15th. We've had, you know, good experiences in the past, and good opportunities to reach out to the community with information on energy efficiency in our electrification program. So, you know, we're going to continue to participate in those. We engaged Energy New England, purchased 10,000 Massachusetts Class 1 RECs. And, you know, that contract value is about $370,000. So that's, you know, we do that 4 times a year and we finish, you know, in June. We'll finish in June probably of 23 for calendar year 22. So that's moving along as it should. I think probably the big news is the interest-free loan program through Energy New England. Very exciting for the community. The DOER has notified E&E and MWEC that they're setting aside $5 million in funding for MLPs to put together a loan program. 2.7 million of that's going to Energy New England. And I kind of outlined in my update that I sent you guys how that would work, but they're planning on an interest-free loan program that mirrors Mass Save heat loans. It's up to 7 year. It'll be up to 7-year term, up to 25,000. So, you know, it's something that we've been missing for years, and we're hoping that it really helps, you know, promote the programs that we have. When you look at the overall projects and whatnot, I kind of threw in the outline in the update. So for the projects itself, you know, E&E's forecasting that they'd have 450 heat pump projects, weatherization, about 250 batteries for residential, about 100 electric vehicle charging for residential. And so those would be the stations, 125, and electric infrastructure improvements for electrification, about 250 projects. So, you know, clearly it's a great start, but if you look at the whole thing, when you think about $2.7 million, it doesn't go that far, but it's a start. And so we're excited about that. And, you know, more to come as that develops. Summer energy peak, you know, we still could peak in September. Unlikely, but we have to get another heat wave. But this year we forecasted 5 peak days. I'm sure you all got the notifications. To date, the peak was set on July 20th, hour ending 19. We did forecast that properly, and we had the hot water controls in the off position and the electrical thermal storage heating during that hour. So that was good. It's always a tough thing when I tell you we missed it, but we didn't miss it. So
Good job.
yeah. So our peak during that hour was 37.939 megawatts. We did call a peak for the next day as well. And it turned out that wasn't the ISO peak, but our peak on the next day was 38.2
Oh,
megawatts.
wow.
So we did a good job. Definitely shaved some load. We can't tell you exactly how much we shaved because it's a voluntary program right now. But we forecasted it right, and we have over 600 email addresses that our Google group goes out to. So good thing. And like I said, as long as we don't have another heat wave in September, we should have hit the peak, which that'll help with the capacity, the annual capacity payment. So for next year. Concord Middle School project, we're still working away on that. Internally, we're working on the electrical design still and the specifications. 2 weeks ago, I met with the school's architect and Solar Design Associates to continue to work through the contract drawings to make sure everything's coordinated and properly stated. We made some adjustments based on the feedback, but everything's moving along quite well, and we'll continue to meet with them as changes develop. So that's going well. Our next step is, once we get through the design, is to start looking at costs, and then we'll be talking to the board about costs. I want to bring that to the board sooner than later, because if we need to do a borrowing at town meeting, we need to have that stuff in December, and that's not a lot of time from now. On the personnel side, we extended an offer to another grade 1 line worker candidate, and that candidate accepted. So he's going through the onboarding process right now, and we're hoping to have that candidate on board within the next few weeks, which is great. And that leaves us with 1 line worker position open. So we're in much better shape than we were 2 or 3 months ago.
That's excellent to hear. I want to ask a few questions. So going back to upcoming events, you had mentioned tabling at a few events. Are we past the pandemic far enough to do an electric vehicle ride and drive event? We did them prior to the pandemic, and it was part of our EV outreach, is getting people to try out those cars. That tends to really push adoption.
Great question. Let me reach out to E&E and see where they are on it, but my initial reaction is yes, but let me check with them because they have a major role in that.
All right. Next question, Warren, I'm going to go through my questions real quick, and maybe I'll cover something. So E&E is receiving this doer financing program. I know that CAB was working on bill financing in the idea that we may get seed funding from the town to be able to do on-bill financing with the light plant. Have you looked into those efforts and where they may overlap and how we might best leverage this program?
I haven't done that yet.
Okay. So it would be good because Mass Save, the heat loan program, has limitations on what can apply to, and CAB may have desired to have other technology qualify for other reasons.
I don't think we have control over what qualifies for this. That comes from the state. And-
Right, but maybe we take a funding from town meeting and create a second pool to cover what is not covered in the heat loan program, such that to the end customer, the technologies we want them to adopt, they have a method. So the mentions of the peak load, it's great that we hit the peak load. And you mentioned that it's a voluntary program. I just have to make a comment that the value of a time of use rate or critical peak pricing here would give a small financial signal for the behavior change. And I think that could really amplify those savings. The middle school solar and storage project, we had organized a stakeholder meeting with about 15 key people. At that meeting, we discussed that we were doing this in preparation for a public meeting. Do you feel that E&E and SDA and SMMA are ready for such a meeting to discuss the solar component of the middle school?
Not yet. As they get closer to 100% contract drawings, we will be, but we're not there yet. So if you look at the timeline, hate to present something that's going to change. And, even as recently as 2 weeks ago, we had some modifications. And, once we get to a point where we know, this is pretty much it, then I think that would be the time to have the meeting.
So I've heard concerns from select board members and some members of this committee about getting the knowledge of the public higher on this topic. So I feel it might be good to schedule that sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks, such that we can inform the public of what you and I know from that earlier meeting.
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks is certainly reasonable. I just don't think today we're quite ready. I think it'd be early.
All right. Well, there's a lot of schedules to coordinate on that one, so we should start planning that. I think that was it. Oh, one more comment on the solar and storage. The federal, what do they call it? Inflation Reduction Act changed how we can finance these kinds of projects. So the tax credits, because the light plant in the town doesn't pay taxes, those couldn't really apply to us in those projects. And I know we worked with Kearsarge so that they could receive it and so forth. But now the Fed is willing to give a rebate to those that don't pay taxes. So that may make how we finance these kinds of projects more clear. It doesn't change the price, but it may make it more clear on how we can go forward. Warren, you have a question? Thank you.
And let me just comment on your last comment, Brian. With the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, municipal utilities definitely can qualify for the direct pay from the federal government. Not all non-tax paying entities will be able to qualify. So we don't want to get the word out to everybody.
Thank you.
Not tax paying that they will be qualified. I thought there's a lot of good news in the report. I know this is probably not under your control, but personally, I think the most important thing about the E&E program is not the interest-free component, it's the loan component, helping people with the upfront payments. Personally, I think it would be better to charge a couple of percentage points interest if that means that there would be more households that would be able to qualify, because I don't think a small interest payment would stop people from participating, but it would be nice to have as many money for as many households as possible.
And you're thinking that interest collection could allow us to qualify more risky lender or
no, not more risky lenders. It's just the numbers that sent out there, there's a fairly limited number of loans that ENE is going to be able to make. If there was some interest coming back, they'd be able to make more loans.
Mhm.
But that's probably beyond our control, but I just want to say
It
that.
is, it's state limitations based on the program.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
Nope.
All right, seeing none. Thank you, Dave. Jason, would you like to give a broadband update?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. Reminder that I do put a broadband update every month on the concordma.gov/broadband page under monthly updates. You can always reach out to us, broadband@concordma.gov, if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback. We completed 11 new customer installs in the month of August. We had 20% more trouble tickets come through that required staff to go on site. These are issues with hardware or splicing that's required. And unfortunately, that does cut into the number of new installs we can complete. But we are on target to do a lot more in September, primarily because we've had a really high demand for people who are interested in the service, both a lot of move-ins, move-outs. I think August was one of the highest turnover rates in terms of people moving in and out that we've seen in a long time. And then also, we have to do walkthroughs for all those people, and we try to prioritize time-sensitive ones so that we don't lose a customer. Some people, they have current service and they're interested in moving, and then some people, they're going to get internet one way or the other, and if we can make it happen on a particular day, we'll get that customer. So we always are trying to juggle priorities like that and make sure we don't lose customers that we would otherwise have. We did cross the threshold, 1,600 total customers, so that's good. We do have an outside vendor that assists with difficult or long polls, and they're getting ready to do another few days of work for us. We have some very complex places where you can't get a bucket to, and will require a lot of ladder work, and it just speeds things along for us to let us focus on the customer install and the last splicing that happens. Operationally, one of our 2 network engineers, Victor, gave his notice in August. He was commuting from Providence, and it was just a difficult drive for him after a year and a half, but we wish him the absolute best. He's offered to help in any way he can. We do have another network engineer, Tomas, who's on staff, who's doing a great job. He's been here since November of last year. So we feel we're in a good spot, but we did reach out to 2 separate vendors just to make sure that we have adequate support in the event of an emergency if our one network engineer is not available. So we have those resources are on standby should we need any help. But we did already advertise the position, and we advertised it until filled so that we could start interviewing immediately. We got 2 first-round interviews done and 1 second-round interview. We have another interview scheduled for this week. So I'm hopeful that we can get that position filled soon. It is nice to know that there's always somebody who's available and on call should there be an issue, whether it's on the municipal side or the broadband side. We also made positive movement in the hiring of a broadband manager. We had a positive first-round interview with a candidate, and we're bringing that candidate back for a second-round interview. And we did also, in that time before we had the interview, we had reached out to a recruiting firm to find out if we could get some assistance filling the position should we have trouble. So we've kind of have that on standby, but we're going to pursue that if we don't feel like it's working out with the current pool of candidates. I did want to mention that on Monday, September 19th, we're going to start some splicing work. This is work that was scheduled in July, but had to be pushed back because of our vendor not having the right number of personnel to be able to do this. It's really technically difficult because it's going to require 2 splicers simultaneously, one of them in a bucket, which they typically don't do aerial splicing, but we have to because of our lack of slack in our service. So that work is scheduled from Monday through Thursday night. It'll start every night around 8 p.m., but fiber shouldn't be cut until closer till 10. We're only anticipating 55 customers will be impacted. We did send postcards to those customers and encourage them to look at the maintenance updates on the broadband website. So there will be some mass communication probably tomorrow, because we're going to have a better idea of how many days this will take. It could be 2 on the good side. It could be 4 on the slow side. So we're trying to see how many people they're going to send our way and how many simultaneous splices we can do at the same time. But it should not impact the entire network, just those 55 customers, but we will let everyone know just in the event that there's a brief impact due to the splicing that's going to take place. It's over 300 fibers, and this was damaged back in December of last year when some rodents chewed through quite a bit of fiber. Our RFP for help desk services was successful, and we're wrapping up a package to give to the town manager to make a recommendation to accept a proposal. The one going forward is the same vendor we have today, so there won't be any interruption in service or difference to our customers. We've been very happy with this company, and we did check their references, even though we're a current customer, and they came back glowing. So we're excited to continue our partnership with them, and glad that that long legal process for procurement is coming to a close. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was the rate and speed adjustment survey results. I did put a summary in the update for this month, and I wanted to talk about it briefly. I know that we had talked about bringing a proposal to everyone. We're going to be doing that hopefully in the October meeting and have a formal rate hearing for that. The data was really helpful in informing our decisions because we had kind of three primary paths that we were looking at, and it is very illuminating. We got such a huge response rate, almost 15% of our current customers, plus a fair number of other people who are interested in broadband. I'm going to very briefly just show the highlights of that, share my screen here, and just because I think it's worth noting, number one, the level of participation, and then number two, some of the data. So we did get about I think it was 85% of the respondents were current customers, so 200, almost 240. This is good news. 95% were happy with their current service, which is great. Those that weren't were given the opportunity to give us feedback, which we're listening to and trying to respond to. This is just a quick breakdown of the different speeds that people have that responded to the survey. You can see that business is pretty underrepresented, but there's also a very small number of business customers relative to the number of residential customers, which kind of reflects Concord's breakdown of population demographics. In general, this was a little surprising, but most people are actually satisfied with the speeds that we offer today. This suggests that a major shakeup is probably not warranted. The biggest reason that people are not satisfied is that blue section there that says speeds are too slow. There's a few smattering of other options, but really the people who aren't happy just feel like we need faster speeds offered. The vast majority think that the speeds we offer today are competitive. There is a minority, and I do know that, relative to Comcast and some other ISPs, that some of our speeds aren't as fast as the ones that they offer. The prices, this was an interesting one. So 106 people, not the majority, but still a fair number, felt that prices would discourage someone from signing up. So that is something we need to be mindful of to not price people out of this solution. This question, I feel like after I got the comments, I would probably change this to allow an other here, because a lot of people who picked $10 said, actually, I picked $10, but that was the only option I had. I would pay $5 or I would pay nothing to double my speed. So this question, it is interesting to note the number of people that would pay more than $10, but I feel like the way that it was framed did not accurately represent what people's thoughts were. In terms of what people were looking for, higher speeds, lower pricing, installation costs, wireless, or fewer tiers, you can kind of see this shows you kind of like a heat map of where people's thoughts and attitudes are. They definitely like the higher speeds, and they definitely like the lower pricing, and also wireless is a pretty big priority, nudging out all the other ones. The installation costs and the fewer tiers, not as popular. And then, oh, that's just a duplicate. So that was the last slide I had. So we will be using that data to inform the changes that we recommend next month. And I just really appreciate all the feedback we got from people and all the people that have taken the time to talk to me about this. I've tried to pick a lot of brains, and I have more to pick. So I just appreciate the opportunity to get that information. And that's my update.
Excellent, thank you. As one of this month's trouble tickets, I appreciate the response and getting things solved. It seems to be a lot more stable.
Oh, that's great.
Does the board have any questions or comments?
I love how comprehensive these reports are each month. They're fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. Jason, do you mind sending out that small presentation to the board?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's at the end of my my update that I sent. So,
Oh, so
but I can send. It was a PowerPoint. I just dropped the images into it. I'm happy to send it separately. But
It's attached.
okay,
you're all set. I didn't scroll far
okay.
down.
Yep.
All right. Seeing no other board comments, I feel we're ready to move on to the 2021 audit. Dave, who would you like to lead this?
So Matt's going to lead this one and the next topic as well. So Matt, you can take it away and you can share your screen if you have stuff you want to show.
Morning. So this is coming a lot later than I had hoped. I would like to be presenting this to you maybe in May, June timeframe, but here we are in September, so I apologize for that. I'm hoping next year to be a lot more timely. So I'm going to go through the audit report for the year ending 2021. So this right here, what you can see is the cover page. The next page is the table of contents. Gives you an outline of the entire report. And then this is the independent auditor's report. This is what they call the opinion, the auditor's opinion. And this is our opinion for these financial statements was clean. I'm not aware that the light plants ever received an unclean opinion. So just par for the course. Scrolling down to page 5 of the report, and I'm going to refer to the page at the bottom of the page, the number at the bottom of the page rather than the PDF number. This next section is the management discussion and analysis. It provides a narrative in a lot of cases for some of the activity in the financials, and essentially how the financials work together. I'm going to go down to the bottom of this first page of the management discussion and analysis and go through this financial highlights. At the end of 2021, our net position was almost 46 million, which was comprised of 36 million in capital assets, net of related debt, a little over 6 million restricted for the depreciation fund, and then 4 million unrestricted. The change in net position, or the net income for the light plant for the year, was positive 1.8 million. This increase was mainly due to the rate refund adjustment, which we'll see later on, and a reduction in the pension and OPEB costs, which was a little bit surprising going into the year. Staying in, there's more detail in here, but I'm going to skip past it. There's one part I wanted to stop at here, and just to clarify, I reworded this broadband operations paragraph from the prior year to make it a little bit more understandable, but I wanted to just go through it so you're all aware of where we're at. Back in 2013, we were approved for $1 million in borrowing. We then went ahead and borrowed 100,000 in 2014, and then another 500,000 in 2016. And then in 2017, we were approved for another $1 million in borrowing for the broadband company. We then borrowed another 338,000, which, from what I've been told by Townhouse, that they've exhausted that exhausts our initial $1 million in funding, even though it doesn't add up to $1 million. So we then borrowed recently in 2021 131,000, which is going against the second authorization. So we have a little under 900,000 left to borrow on our current authorizations. And then we also went in and approved this $1.9 million loan between electric and broadband. And I want to explain that as far as these financial statements are concerned, the electric department and the telecom division are one entity. So the 1.9 million is essentially just a intercompany loan. So it's not necessarily on the face of the financial statements, but it's kind of just an intercompany agreement essentially. Any questions on that?
Matt, I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
So there's some question about the legitimacy of that value. And my understanding is that those are true expenses that were incurred by broadband. And so we shouldn't be challenging that 1.9 million in expense. Can you just confirm that?
Yeah, so year over year, going back to 2013 when we started incurring expenses, we were putting out a ton of capital costs that wasn't reflected in the net income. So the net income generally remained positive, or it didn't dip too low, and then it started going positive at some point. But the cash flows for the telecom business were going down because we were sending out so much cash each year. So yes, the 1.9 were legitimate telecom expenses and capital purchases throughout the life of the business. And it just kind of came to head once we started splitting out the financial statements between the two companies.
And you explained it, but I want to make sure I understand. So the 2013 approval of a $1 million borrowing, as of today, we only exercised, what was it? 338,000. Is that correct?
No, so we did the 100,000, 500,000, and 338. So what is that?
Okay. So you add those together, and that's a little less than $1 million, and that's the value that we exercised on that approval.
Correct.
In 2013, right? Yeah.
Yes. And then there was another approval in 2017 of $1 million. And how much have we exercised against that?
Just this 133,000.
Okay. And then there was the intercompany 1.9 in expenses. So that means that electric ratepayers finance broadband to the 1.9, and we talked about the repayment schedule and so forth. So the outstanding debt load for this money is how much in total? I mean, has some of this has been paid down, or what's our position today in this area?
Well, the 1.9 was it just started to get paid back starting in 2022. It's around a 1.8 million currently as of today.
And the town meeting borrowings in 2013 and 2017, what's the repayment on that?
I'd have to pull, let me check here. The current outstanding debt for telecom, this is as of June 2020, but is little 363,000.
Okay, so of the 2 million authorized, we still have 363 to pay back.
Correct.
Okay, and then then there's 1.9 that we're paying back from broadband to electric in addition to that.
Yeah, and those, I mean, those payments could be suspended if the telecom business were, not in a good financial position. But currently, it seems like they're able to eat that cost at this point.
All right.
Now,
So
I'm sorry, could I give a dumbed down version of this for those who might not be following the accounting?
Sure.
So broadband is a capital intensive business as a startup because you have installation expenses in addition to overhead. right? I don't know the exact number, but doesn't it cost like $1,500 or $2,000 to drop a new service into somebody's house? And you're only getting paid back at this rate of $50 or $100 a month. So you have to borrow the money to do the installation to get the future stream of payments. And in the early years of telecom, we were very focused on the net income statement, just how much revenue was it bringing in versus what our operating expenses were. But we weren't paying so much attention to the balance sheet, which was accumulating this debt, partly because we weren't having to go out and borrow it from third-party lenders. We were able to use the light plant's capital. So that's really the source of the 1.9 million, is that capital intensive requirement was absorbed by the light plant. And the auditors came in and said, you know, it's not good. It's not good accounting practice for you to have this intercompany loan without some type of documentation and a repayment schedule. And that's why in 2016, the 1.9 million was formalized. It's not new expenses. It's not, the light plant, assigning after the fact overhead expenses to broadband. It was simply broadband needed the capital to start up the business, and the light plant provided it.
Right. So I wanted to conclude my thoughts of the 363,000 that remains from those 2013 and 2017 borrowings. Broadband needs to continue to make payments on that, and we have the payment schedule for the 1.9, which is now around 1.8, you said. But the good thing is that there's a concern that this debt load is prohibiting the broadband business from meeting some of its goals and continuing to grow at a good pace. This board has the ability to allow broadband to suspend those payments to the light plant, to allow them to make capital investments if we choose. So I want to make sure that we all agree that that's a true statement, that we're not going to allow the debt load to inhibit the growth of the broadband business. And Jason, I welcome any comments that you want to add to this as well.
Yeah, I think that we've worked really closely with Dave and Matt to figure out, what a fair and reasonable repayment schedule is. I think it's worked so far, but I think that the task force raises a valid point that if we're looking to expand, we need to have more capital. And so I think that we need to look at that holistically, not just from this one source, but there's a lot of different areas where we have revenue and we have money that we need to spend. So we need a capital plan, a 5 and a 10-year capital plan, so we know what expansion we're looking at. And once we have dollars attached to that, we can then say, this is the money we need and here are the sources we can get it from. I think that has been a recommendation of the task force from early on, is that we're not just simply looking to say we don't want to pay back the money right now. We need a plan, and then we can analyze all the potential revenue sources for that.
Excellent. I think that's a great path forward with a capital planning.
Right, just one point. So if I heard it correctly, broadband still has available borrowing capacity of an additional 867,000 that's been authorized. So that's sort of still an option on the table. And I think to Jason's point earlier, what the board really needs is what is the long-term strategy and the viability of, and what do we need to do? So no decision to be made, but right now the funding is reasonable at this point, given our current requirements.
And importantly, the funding can be made available should we find a good capital plan to invest in.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Anyone else have comments on this particular section of what Matt is going over? Seeing none, Matt, please continue.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and Jason. That's gonna conclude the management discussion and analysis section. I'm gonna move down to the actual financial statements. This first one is the statement of net position, which is essentially the balance sheet for a business. I'm just gonna go through and kind of highlight some of the areas that I feel are important. The first one being cash. Our cash balance has been kind of slowly going down in the unrestricted area. However, At the same time, our restricted cash is going up. So we've got some kind of a disparity between those. I like to see the unrestricted be a little bit more healthy than what it is right now, but we'll get there with through the budget process, I think. AR has gone down quite a bit. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt again, Matt. Do you feel that the unrestricted cash is going down because we need to implement the PCA, or is that affecting the restricted cash?
As far as what you're looking at on the screen right now, I don't think this was a PCA issue. This is just
Wrong year. I apologize. Wrong year. That's this year, not last year.
Yeah, so we'll get into that in the next topic, because the cash has gone down heavily since then, which is going to be related to the margins between our power, the cost of power, and what we've collected on that power.
Brian, could we hold questions until Matt's done so that we can get through this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The next piece is the AR, which has gone down. I think this kind of peak was due to some of the COVID collections that we went through a big collections process, and it's come down quite a bit. So that's very nice to see. Let's move on. So our capital went down slightly, and that was just because our additions were a little bit under what our depreciation was for the year. So these are the net capital numbers. The prepaid up here, sorry to jump back. The prepaid, the decrease here was due to the just timing of the purchase power. Our balance at E&E at the year end was a lot less compared to the prior year, because they had just paid a bunch of power bills at the end of the year. Excuse me. Moving down to the liabilities, AP is up. Again, this is just timing of bills at year end. It all just kind of fluctuates at the end of each year. Also this includes 2.1 million of RECs that were purchased in 2022 that were accrued back into 2021. So that this looks a little bit higher. If you take that 2.1 out, it actually went down as far as the power bills are concerned. Unearned revenue. This has mostly to do with the drawdown of the rate refund, which we'll see on the income statement on the next page. And then one of the big reasons that I talked about for our change in net income was due to the pension. If you'll notice, these four numbers here, the decrease here was like about $3 million between these four numbers. Some of that went to this deferred inflow section, but this only went up 2 million. So you've got $1 million difference that just came off of our books. And this had to do with essentially some changes in the actuary statement. They adjusted the discount rate that was used for, which looks out in the future what our costs are going to be and what our expected activity is going to be. We also reduced our, as far as the town's pension plan and OPEB plan, our portion of that reduced down a couple percentage points. And then lastly, our investments in the pool did a lot better than were expected. So the cost of our pension for the year and our liabilities went down considerably, which flowed down to the bottom line. So I just wanted to point that out. Net position, you'll see it's pretty consistent year over year. Went up a little bit because we made money in the current year. Moving on to the next page, we have the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position. This is the income statement for most businesses. You'll notice electric sales went up. This was due to the this is the first year of the cost of service study rate changes that went into effect. We also sold a little bit more volume in 2021, so that kind of accounts for that increase there. Here is the rate refund piece that I was talking about. We drew down the balance sheet item 1.7 million for 2021, which directly flows. You'll note if we didn't do that, we would have barely did a little bit better than breaking even on the year. So that was a decision going into the year that we wanted to use that buffer to not raise the rates up here to then have a return on income. That makes sense. Purchase power went up considerably, but I do want to point out that this includes the cost of RECs. If you take out the RECs, the cost of power went up 1.3 million. So it stayed pretty much in line with the increase with the sales, which is what we expected. Salaries and benefits went down. A little bit of this had to do with the COVID dollars that we've talked about in the past flowing to this section, and then now they're going to other places. But the main reason for this decrease was that the change in the the pension and OPEB costs. So there's where that $1 million is reflected. And then I'm going to move on. I'm not going to go through the cash flow statement. I don't think anybody would really gain anything from that. And then this, starting on page 12, is the notes to the financial statements. This goes through and breaks down almost everything that you see on the financial statements and gives some description and breakdown between those. I'm not going to go through anything here unless you guys have questions. And then the last thing I want to point out is on page 42. I always like to point this out because it's important, especially nowadays. We have it's the same financial statements as above, but it breaks out the light fund from broadband. So you can see the breakdown if you wanted more granularity. And then that is all I had on the, I had one more thing I wanted to show you, sorry. When the auditors originally presented the financials to the finance committee, they were a little bit taken back by the fact that we did not have a management letter. And this was because the auditors didn't feel there was any recommendations that warranted management's knowledge. So we essentially didn't have any findings this year. So I just wanted to point out that after the fact, they created a no management letter to explain that there was no management letter. So
I've not heard of that before.
Yeah,
It's never happened, right?
So I just wanted to go down. What was that section? Well, essentially, you can read through it. It essentially says that there's no findings to be known. So, any questions on the audit report?
Wendy.
I think it's good news that there are no findings.
Yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
Clean
Yeah, no, I
books.
was just going to comment as a representative on the Financial Audit Committee. So Matt did a fantastic job walking through the financials, and the committee was incredibly pleased with the results. And I know over the last few years, we've been challenged with implementation of a new billing system and inventory control, and all of that hard work has really paid off over the last couple of years, as you can see in this clean report. So kudos to you and the team. Great work.
Thank you.
Warren. Oh, I think you muted Warren.
Sorry. This does look very good. my one question is, are you expecting that projections of future returns through OPEB will be reduced as prospects for returns through the stock market are lower now than last year, so that there may be more money that needs to be going in that direction in the coming year?
So I actually was putting together the budget yesterday, some of the budget items, and my inclination is that I don't want to reduce. I don't think the trend is going to continue. I'm guessing they're going to probably squeeze it, budget back to where it was before in a lot of those cases. Plus, I don't think we're probably going to realize a significant investment income compared to this year. So yeah, I think I'm going to budget for it going forward as kind of a higher cost item than what we saw this year.
Okay, thank you.
It's funny, this did come up on the Financial Audit Committee, and I think the same topic was raised, and maybe it was with retirement, but I think there was an observation that the healthcare costs were actually lower than the original projections, and so people seem comfortable with where we were with OPEB at this point, given current healthcare premiums.
Great. One last question. Does anyone have any questions on this before we move on to the 2022 financials? Seeing no questions, Matt, do you want to move on to the next topic?
Sure. I'm going to try to be really quick here. I don't have as much to talk about on these financials. So I actually gave you guys the March quarterly financials and then the June quarterly financials. I just kind of squeezed in the June just before the meeting, so I thought I'd just provide it to you. So the first page is the financial summary. I've given a little bit of a narrative if you want to read through it, and then some of the key pieces that I think that you guys would want to see. If there's anything you want added or taken away, please let me know. I'd be happy to make whatever changes you'd like. Obviously, the big one we've already kind of hit on it is the unrestricted cash has gone down considerably. This is pretty much expected based on where the cost of power and the timing of our rate changes have occurred. We knew that the beginning of the year was going to look kind of ugly because that big increase in cost came in January, February, March, and we spread that initial PCA over the entire year. So we knew there was going to be a deficit towards the beginning of the year, and then we'd slowly climb out. Well, then power costs didn't go down as much as we expected, and then we changed the rates. So we believe that we're going to hopefully limp across the finish line at the end of the year, and it's going to look a lot better once we get to that finish line. But for right now, it's a little bit ugly, especially mainly due to the cash balance. I always bring this up that we do still have a pretty significant restricted cash to cover up the deficit and the unrestricted cash. Plus, we always keep about a little under $3 million with E&E at any given time to pay for future power bills. The other pieces on here, I mean, really the whole story for 2022 so far is the cash, and then the sales versus power. The big thing to point out here as far as sales is these margins between the 7.6 and the 4.7 and the 8.4 and 6.1, that those margins are squeezed in 2022 compared to the prior year. And you can see that down here in the cost per unit differences. The other thing I just thought I'd point out is broadband. We've gained 69 customers. I think that's always important to keep an eye on those. We're steadily growing, although maybe not as high as we thought we would. And then I'm just going to move on to the June financial summary, because you guys probably have questions on some of the other stuff. In my haste of putting together this set of financials, I realized that I missed one entry there. This number owes this number 2.1 million for that final rec purchase of 2021. So this is actually more like 3 million or a little under 3 million deficit. So it's not as bad as it looks. Sorry to cause a big alarm. And then kind of the same trends that we're seeing here, bigger margin, bigger margin last year than this year, and the cost of power and the sales per volume are going up. So that's really all I had, unless you guys have specific questions on these financials.
Alice, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Obviously, I'm not as well versed on the financials as others might be on this call, but looking at these numbers, I'm thinking, do you have an expectation that we'll need to raise rates again in early 2023 to meet the deficits? What are you thinking that the impact on our rates will be? I know it's a tough question, but I'm thinking ahead about what our work will involve.
This is probably a Laura question, but based on what I've heard, it sounds like the cost of power next year is going to be pretty significant again, especially over the winter. And then we also want to take a quick look a hard look during the budget process to make sure that the rates covering the administrative side of the financials are enough to cover that piece and have a little bit of a return. So I don't know how I don't want to say yes, we're going to raise rates, but my guess is they're going to be.
So to touch on Alice's question, we started the budget cycle earlier this year in anticipation for a rate hearing in November. I anticipate we're going to need one, but we won't know that until we get through the budget process. So that's why we started a little early this year.
It was looking like that to me, that we'd need a rate increase, but I just thought I'd ask it and put it out there in case I misinterpreted the numbers as they were presented. Thank you.
Well, what I would say, Alice, is, and Matt mentioned this earlier, the rate change we made effective with July bills was to increase the PCA from 90 points to 5.9 cents. And we continue to believe that that increase will fully recover 2022 expenses in 2022, so that we're not going to be dragging over any deficits into 2023 from 2022. However, rates, as Matt said, power expenses in 2023 are likely to be higher than what is in current rates. And therefore, as Dave said, it's very likely after we complete the budget process that we will need to make an adjustment to base rates to adequately reflect the cost of power in 2023.
Thank you.
That was clear. Thank you.
Wendy, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, no, I just had two questions. So some of it's rate related, and I understand the PCA was intended to cover a cost by year end. But what I'm always looking at is the unrestricted cash balance, because we do have some policies of retaining a certain unrestricted cash balance to cover 3 months of operating expenses. And, I find these interim reports difficult because there's many moving parts. But, as we go forward and we have more rate discussions, it would be beneficial to understand where our cash position is. We have a lot of potential borrowing coming up, and then consumers tend to look at how much cash we have on hand to help understand whether we should increase rates. So just want to recognize that and just note that I'm concerned about the unrestricted cash balance from a policy perspective. No action, but more to follow, I think,
Yeah,
in the next month or so.
I would point out that we were going into 2022, we were kind of in a bad position.
Yep.
We didn't have a great buffer to start the year.
Yep.
And then power costs, went
Yep.
out of the stratosphere. So, yeah, it's something we need to be concerned with for sure.
Right. Right.
And I'm happy to hear that Laura feels we're still on track to end the year in a whole position and not start 2023 in the rears. But I do understand that the cost of power is going to be higher in 2023. So the PCA may get removed, but rates will need to adjust to collect for those expenses. And we'll need to wait until later in the year to know what those will be. Any other questions on these financials?
Thank you.
One thing, so is this going to be the quarterly document that you send out, Matt, now to kind of update the board? Is this the structure?
Yes, and I will say I've got a spreadsheet that has an infinite number of iterations of these financial statements. So if there's something that you would like to see differently, or
the only
just let me know.
suggestion I'd have is that the table that you have here at the top is wonderful. It's great. It's a nice summary. It would be nice to have another column of target values, something where we can say that this is what we'd like to see for the current situation, and here's where we are. I don't know if that's clear or easy to do, but it'd be nice for the board to say, oh, you know, unrestricted cash is negative 3 million, which is the corrected number. It should be this value, whatever that is. And so we can see very quickly whether or not we're trending in the right direction. And then you can explain from there.
Sure, I can add that.
Okay. I already asked this, but any other questions from the board? Seeing none, I think we're ready to go on to the next topic, which is the in-town solar adoption. This is Article 38 related. Dave, how would you like to lead this?
I'll start. Laura might chime in as well. But I thought it was a good time to give an update on the board on what we've been doing with this and where we are. So we've been looking at town and school locations where we could potentially add solar without removing trees, of course. And we've come up with 7 locations that have potential. We haven't vetted the locations, meaning we haven't spoken to the schools yet and whatnot. We're just strictly looking at locations where we could add solar and how much could we get. So some of the locations that previously were looked at, would require tree removal. So we've taken those off the list and kind of narrowed it down. In the 7 locations that we identified as potential, that works out to about 7, almost 8 megawatts of additional solar. So it's a start in terms of the overall target in Article 38. These locations are meaningful to us. Some of it's ground mounted canopies and some of it's roof. There are additional locations, like roofs that we could put solar on, but you're talking small scale, right? So we're looking at identifying the areas that we can get large scale. So, 8 megawatts is a start. With that in mind, we really identified that there's a need to look at private locations as well, because if we don't, there's not a possibility of meeting that target that's in Article 38. So, the first location that we identified was Emerson Hospital in the parking lot with a canopy. We've reached out to them. They came to us, which opened the door. They came to us for a charging station in the garage. And so we took that opportunity, and we're going to meet with them to talk about, a canopy over their parking area. Looking at the location there, we think, probably 1.5 megawatts in that parking lot. There's a lot of challenges that we have to go through, but we'll get to those. Right now, we're really just looking at trying to identify the locations that we could do this. The next area that we looked at, and this was done back in, I think, 2011, looked at the Hanscom Air Base, and there's a lot of land there. And we think we probably, if the state's agreeable and we can come up with an agreement, could get 3 to 5 megawatts there. So if you add those numbers up, we've identified about 12.5 to 14.5 megawatts of potential. Now, there's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, a lot of stakeholders that need to meet with and go through. But we think we've identified enough to meet the target in Article 38 at this point. So the next steps for us, you really start to look at the financials for these, because it's going to have implication for the board in terms of how this gets done. So that's the next step. Once we get that piece done and and we make a determination on how we're going to go forward with it, then we would reach out to the stakeholders and start working with them to build agreements. And then, the next step would be execute the plan. So at this point, I think we've exhausted all the town locations that could, handle larger scale solar. And we're going to continue to look at private locations too, because, while we've identified a large chunk of solar that would be needed that based on Article 38, we also know that there's a possibility that not all locations in the town could work. We haven't looked at the distribution piece of it yet, interconnection, all that. We're just simply identifying the land. So I think we need to continue to look at private locations as well. But I think we have a good start to the amount that we can add. Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you kind of summarized it pretty well. I mean, we're not confident that we could find enough megawatts on town-owned property, which was the specification in Article 38. However, it's possible by incorporating some solar on privately held land that could potentially be financed through the light plant in the form of a PPA or otherwise, with the combination of private land, that it might be possible that it probably would be possible to meet the goal, albeit dependent on the financials. We have to get a good sense of what this is going to cost so that you can have an understanding of what the impact might be on rates. And we think it would be helpful to start with a demonstration project, perhaps Emerson, because they've expressed interest, get a good feel for what the parking canopies are ultimately going to cost on a per kW basis, so that we can extend that cost out to the remaining parcels and understand what the total cost might be. It's clear reading through all the reports that have happened in the past and the public commentary that town folk do not want to see tree cutting in order to erect solar production within the town's borders. And so this job is made more difficult because ground mounted solar arrays are generally larger scale. You can get more bang for your buck, and you could reach the 20 megawatts easier. I think we're going to have to look at things like parking canopies in order to make the addition of solar palatable to people. And that's going to be smaller scale and it's going to be more expensive. But right now, that's kind of what we're thinking is going to be necessary. Thank you.
Was the Hanscom canopy, or was there also just land that you were identifying?
So it was land, but I think that discussion, it'll probably expand because they're working on the hangars, replacing them. And that might be an opportunity to do roof mounted at the hangars.
So I need to go back to the select board and so forth and discuss where we are and asking for a time extension, because I don't think we're ready to write up this report. one of the big questions I have is what the distribution side, managing this increase in in-town production. I know we had E&E come in and gave a good explanation of backfeeding, but the utility scale storage, I think, is another topic I'd like to see on our agenda. You look like you have a comment, Dave. You want to?
Yeah, that was kind of my next piece to this. So you led into it quite well, Brian.
Okay, sorry. Go. I didn't know. I thought you were finished. Okay.
No. I wanted to go through kind of the outputs of what we identified first. One of the next steps for us is to meet with Eversource to talk about the contracts and backfeeding. And so in 2019, our account rep retired, so we're trying to figure out who the new rep is, and that's been a little bit of a challenge. So we're trying to work through that, but so we'll have those conversations. But I also want to note that, we're going to have to register as an SOG based on Dave Kavanaugh's presentation from E&E a couple meetings ago, and that's good for 5 megawatts, right? So as we develop the plan, and we continue to add, we need to keep in mind that we can only backfeed the system up to 5 megawatts. And what we're talking about in Article 38 is 13 megawatts of additional solar. So once we add, 2 or 3 of these locations to the system, we're going to be at the maximum for backfeeding. And then we're going to have to figure out the next piece, which ties into what you were talking about, Brian, with battery storage.
Right. So,
Dave, is it fair to say regardless of E&E, we're going to have battery storage?
yeah.
If we add this much solar, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's huge. That's a big endeavor.
Yeah.
The other question I had is Article 38 says town properties and so forth, and you've mentioned today that that's just not feasible without cutting down trees. So what have you done in program development for using private property? So I know on Virginia Road you have some office buildings that have solar, and you have a rate. I forget what it's called. It's like a PPA.
It is.
So there's that style of working with commercial customers or private property. There's also a land lease model where you kind of pay rent for the physical space that something sits on. And then you have commercial customers that want to go it themselves and do backup meter installations. Have you done an analysis of these different strategies and come up with templates on how you'd like to interact with customers in these different ways?
We haven't started that yet. Our first goal was to identify the 13 megawatts and how we could get there. The next step, like I said, we're going to meet with Emerson and start that dialogue with them and see, what would attract them to allow us to put solar over the parking lot. And then that'll tie in with what you're talking about, Brian, in terms of, is it a land lease? Is it, what type of arrangement will it be? And that's all stuff that will have to come back to the board for consideration.
Yeah,
and
so
we're not quite there yet.
So with there was a pilot done for multifamily dwellings and EV charging, and that pilot targeted different ways of installing charging, whether it be deeded spots or open parking lots and so forth. I think creating a pilot like that for this large-scale installation may be a good way for the light plant to try out these different methods. So Pam, you have a question.
Yeah, Dave, are you through with your presentation?
Yes, that was
Okay.
it.
All right, so thank you. Very helpful. On battery storage, you said we will need battery storage. I gathered that we may presently need battery storage, and I understand anecdotally, for example, Fenn School, I gather, may have had to build its own batteries for solar. So my question basically is, am I correct that we are presently in need of battery storage? And I've always thought that we really are, and that's something that we need to be budgeting for and thinking about right this minute. So that's question number one. Question number two is, this is the beginning, I gather, of the plan that we are supposed to be creating. Is that right? And in that context, what should we be looking towards in terms of something as basic as the physical format of this? What will we eventually see? Will there be timelines with action items, with, in the nature of a strategic concept? Will there be a report? And when will that happen?
Okay, so the first question you asked about battery storage, the answer is yes, we have a need now for that. And we also can delay a little bit of that if we can work through the details with Eversource and file to be an SOG with ISO New England. That will allow us to backfeed, and that would take care of some of the overproduction needs, but only up to 5 megawatts. So even with that, I still feel that we need battery storage now, because, the numbers in Article 38 are large, and 5 megawatts of backfeeding is not a lot. So under the current parameters, battery storage is currently needed because we're right at that threshold where we could backfeed the system. So yes, it is needed.
Okay,
Now,
can I just follow up with that just quickly then? I think that we need, I consider it a rather urgent item, and I think that it's very costly, and I think that we need to build in quickly the pathway for us getting the money we need for whatever it is that we need for battery storage. So I just encourage you to certainly, it needs to be addressed very clearly and specifically in the plan. And I think the board also, and I'm sure you agree, Dave, I mean, just we need to be getting at this very big piece of the entire picture. So just an encouragement on that. So thank you.
So to that point, we are talking to a vendor about battery storage, a 2 megawatt battery broken up into 2 1 megawatt pieces. Legal counsel's reviewing the agreement right now, and we'll see what comes of it, if it's favorable or not. But we are working on that. It's
Great.
it's in the process.
Good.
And that,
Go ahead.
Well, then
And
the other question, just
Yes.
as strictly physical, and what does this look like as a plan eventually?
well, I think we have to go through each step, and we do have to come up with a plan. That's the outcome from Article 38 is come up with a plan to adopt the additional solar. And so that's a step in the process. We're not quite there yet. I think, we wanted to identify how we could get there first and then go through the next pieces. But yes, there will be a plan. It will be a written plan.
Okay, so just my last, and I'll get off of this. Back in the last meeting I was at, I mean, I certainly felt very strongly that the light plant should take, happily, we want to support the light plant in taking responsibility for creating the plan. There is some sense of urgency with respect to the plan, and there were discussions about maybe moving the plan problem to, or that whole project to a volunteer committee perhaps, and which I was initially not supportive of. So I think that I would like to know, when are we going to have this plan? Can you give us a date, Dave? I know that you're going at it incrementally and methodically, but we also have expectations from the town that we will produce, or the light plant, in my judgment, would be the best place to have such a plan produced. And could you give us a date?
So we have to go through all these pieces. And in the article, I believe the target was December of this year, by the end of the year, to have a plan.
Right.
I don't think that's feasible for us. And that's what I'm trying to work through right now, so that we can go to the select board and ask for an extension on it, because there's just far too much work to do to get the plan done by that date.
So,
Okay, so you're saying that you can't yet project responsibly what the date will be when we will get the plan?
At present time, yes.
Okay, I get that. This is it for me. I also encourage you to think about the skill mix at the plant, and whenever you think, having looked at your skill mix presently and your employment, your workforce, whether you need, we're at an inflection point, whether you think the actual personnel you need needs to be increased, we should know that. I welcome that.
Yep, understood.
yeah, on the documentation front, I have two requests. First is this update is verbal, I'd like to see something for this update in writing to the board. And second, I would like to request that at our November meeting, a early draft of what you plan to write up as this report be done, with labels that say more research needed on this topic. We need something to look at to say, okay, these are the questions you're asking, these are the things you're working on, and what is it going to look like? So if in 2 months you could provide a very preliminary draft that says, here is the distribution issues, here is the land issues, here are the storage and balancing issues, here are the policies and programs issues that we're working on solving, so that we know all these detailed questions you're going to put into the final report.
And Dave, I'm sorry, Brian, I just want to jump in again because I think this is really important. I think Brian is saying exactly the right thing, and I should have said it myself. We need reporting on this, and I would like to see what the outline of this plan would look like, frame of the plan. Are we looking at a detailed plan? Plans can be very general. Are we looking at a very action-oriented plan with operational elements? I would like to have that as well in this report, but I think we need the report, and we have serious obligations coming from the town, and the board has, I feel, I have been, encouraging the plant management to take this on, but we need to make sure that we're really getting there in a concrete way. So I just wanted to, support Brian's point and express the seriousness of this in light of Article 38.
So Dave, do you feel you can do those two reports? One, a written version of this discussion to the board, and two, the November outline with as much detail as you have at that moment?
Yeah, we can definitely get a draft for November. It will be a draft, obviously, but yeah, we absolutely can do that.
And Wendy?
Yeah, I guess I just sort of thinking ahead. As we put the plan together, and to Pam's point earlier, I think battery storage is important. And Dave, I'm really encouraged that you're following up on a potential solution. But as we think forward to the budget, which I know we'll consider in December, we need to understand also whether we should be anticipating a warrant article for funding, et cetera. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider. So that plan is going to have to make some statement about financing too. So just thinking forward about that process, we need to be mindful of that, along with rates and the other investments that we need to make around the implementation of the meters as well.
So to that point, Wendy, you're right on with town meeting and borrowing. I think one of the pieces, one of the locations that adds to that, the totals I was talking about earlier, is the middle school. And that's why I was mentioning in that update that we're going to need to talk about funding and the financial piece of it, because if we do decide to own the array there, we're going to need to go to town meeting for a borrowing.
Right.
And so that's why it's important. The next step on that discussion is to start talking about the financial piece. And that's just one small piece to Article 38.
Right. And it's September. We only have October, November, and
Right.
Correct.
The timetable's
a lot of work
cooking.
to do.
Right.
So Dave, I had asked for you to kind of identify the easiest large-scale project do you feel you could move forward on this effort? What do you think is the low-hanging fruit for a site that could be developed with solar so that we can have the middle school and another site in the next couple of years to show that activity, actual, installations are happening?
So I think there's the middle school obviously is low hanging fruit because it's on the plan already and
Right.
we're working on it. I think a couple other locations that is doable in the near term would be the wastewater treatment plant, which we put an RFP out years ago to do that. It fell through. But I'd have to reach out to Public Works and just coordinate with them. But so I think that's one of the low hanging ones. And then if you're at the high school and you're looking at the school, to the left of the school is a grass area that could be ground mounted, easily interconnected with our distribution system. So that would be the second location that I would say is low hanging fruit, assuming there's no red flags with it. But those are the two other ones.
Okay.
But Dave, is
So,
solar saturation an issue at the high school location?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the battery storage again, right? Yep.
So with those two locations, I know that the schools, that landfill that's capped next to the schools, when they did the cap, were talking about using that as a track and have other ideas of what that land could be used for. And I'm not sure that any kind of canopy could go into that ground, as there's a cap there for those materials.
So that would be no different than the landfill, Brian. It would be a ground mounted, not penetrating.
Yeah, but if the schools want a dual use where they want to track and we want to do production there, that's
Challenge.
so there's concerns about that location. But the other is when the filtration beds were looked at, there was concern that the state would issue a letter about rebuilding those filtration beds, and that was what killed that effort. So have we received that letter? Have we looked into those kind of questions?
So that wasn't what killed that project. It probably added to it, but it wasn't what killed it.
Okay.
So the filtration beds, have always been an area that Public Works has looked for groundwater reinjection. And so it would be a dual use site. And that's why I have to reach out to Alan on that and go through the details of it. But those are all the stakeholder meetings that I was referring to.
Yep.
We've identified these areas that could handle solar. And now, you have to talk to the folks on the next step. And, is there a competing use for that land? And like you identified something at the high school that could be an issue, right?
Yeah. It would be good to have the community feel that we're not waiting until 2024, 2025 for the middle school project, but we're actually looking at a shorter timeline for another project.
Yeah.
I see two hands up. Alice, you've been patient, and then I'll go to Pam.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my mouse right now. So my question is about the high school project. There's about to be a road resurfacing, and I'm wondering if we should take advantage of that project to lay the conduit for a future installation of solar. I mean, the roadbed's going to be all dug up. Is that a possibility for us to consider laying the conduit needed?
Yeah, I would definitely, if they're going to repave, it would be the time to put conduits in. The challenge to it is without having a design, you're kind of shooting blind on where you're going to have your conduit stubbed. And that's, if you look at the middle school project, we, have a design in place. We know where the foundations are going to go. We know where the conduit needs to come up. So that's the big thing. You don't want to put conduits in and then have to excavate to bring them to their final location later. So that's the challenge.
I just want to raise that as an option that we should really be thinking about it before we start digging up the high school, that we think forward enough to a potential use for a solar site at the high school.
That's a very good question, Alice. Pam.
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to Wendy's point on solar saturation. I mean, I don't understand how it seems like we're going off in different directions that have to be done simultaneous. I mean, I just think the solar saturation problem is a showstopper. I mean, if so, I don't.
So
I would love to see. I just want to reiterate that we need to see how we're going to get there, I guess. And the only other point I wanted to make was with respect to this plan. Plans can be big or small. I think that it's obvious that we want to see some certainty as to when we're going to, how we're going to get places and when we're going to get places. So I would encourage you not to, feel like you have to get totally granular right now, but to get elements out to us or the big picture out to us so that we have confidence as the town needs that we are, that by a date certain X, Y, and Z will happen without feeling that you have to wait until everything is completely understood. So I just,
yeah, the request was to have a project that we could work on now. The solar saturation issue is solved by having storage and solar and storage installed. So we're behind. I mean, this is a problem we've had for a while that we've been talking about. We need to write this report, but we also need to show that we're actually taking action. So it's kind of two
no, I
conversations.
understand that. I'm just trying to encourage Dave to, and us to be working a little bit more, I guess, aggressively on the solar saturation problem.
That was why
Yeah,
we
and
talked
also,
about a citizen group being involved in this process so that this board wouldn't use every meeting to talk about it.
but we're not going in that direction, Brian.
Correct.
We've already talked about that, and we're in the direction we're in. And I do think it's a very real function of the light plant and the board to be moving on this very basic issue, which is solar saturation. And I think that's where we are, and what we aren't at, where we aren't is maybe perhaps moving aggressively enough to understand how we're going to get at this. And the budget issues are big, and it's not cheap, and it's also a very, very big component of things. And finally, the request not to worry about being too granular at the expense of not telling us big milestones that can be filled in, so that the town understands that we're actually moving on this whole immense project. And thank you, Dave, very much for everything that you've offered. I think those are wonderful elements to begin with.
Laura.
I just want to say that this might be helpful to think about this in this way, Pam. My own feeling is that based on the work that we had commissioned a couple of meetings ago, it is clear that the settlement only generator option for pushback is the cheapest way to address our current need for battery storage. Okay, it's going to be much cheaper than buying a battery and putting it on the system. However, it's going to be of limited utility because we need it now to address the Fen school, people who want to put solar up, who don't have enough shaping capability to move the power around. Okay, so we need it now. Settlement only generator first, but shortly thereafter, okay, the next solution is going to have to be a battery because we will have exhausted the settlement only generator maximum capability. And then, despite the fact of being more expensive, our next move would be the battery storage. So I personally think of it somewhat consecutively, but it doesn't mean we have a ton of time with the battery. Okay, I would do the settlement only generator first, and then we next work on getting the battery. So you don't have to do everything all at once.
And also the sediment only generator deals with the saturation moments. It does not allow us to do peak shaving, which is lowering our capacity and transmission expenses. So batteries have that value. They can also have value on the other end of lowering the saturation issue. So yes, one of the basic questions about storage that I have that I want to see answered is, how do we value storage? I mean, storage has a capacity value to it. So are we going to say, for a capacity price of $5 is where storage, if it gets above that, that storage makes sense if it costs us. I mean, I want to know the metrics that you're going to evaluate these kinds of projects so that we can have some understanding of what we're targeting. What's a good value for the storage effort? We're going to have other issues when we start to do storage where the more storage we add, the less value we're going to see in some of those areas and the longer durations we're going to need. This gets very complicated very quick, and I feel we're very behind in generating this report. So, you know, I would love to see the outline in November to see what questions you're working on so that we can refine those questions so that we really do get a really in-depth report that allows us to be actionable in meeting this large target. Wendy, you look like you have a question.
No, I'm all set. Thanks.
Any other questions on this topic?
Thank you very much, Dave and Brian, for
Mhm.
it's helpful, and Laura.
Because this is a big deal. This is you know, a very large undertaking that is very complex. So I appreciate the time Dave and Laura are putting into this. And we need to not just make a small report on land use or a small report on you know, other topics. This needs to be a comprehensive, how are we going to evolve our grid to allow for such a large amount of generation compared to our demand. And that's something many utilities are struggling with. So great.
So Brian, can I actually just say one thing? It does seem like the E&E solution is a priority.
Yep.
And I know we're going to research that. So it would be good to have an update on that next month, because it really is risk mitigation right now around the solar saturation. Again, it helps in the larger solar context, but right now it's risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good point.
Dave, do you feel you could do that?
Yeah.
Provide an SOG update?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
Does the board have any other questions on this topic?
Nope.
All right.
Good discussion.
Yeah, it was a very good discussion. Thank you. We're on to liaison and public comments. So if anyone would like to give a comment, please raise your hand and turn on your video. Alice?
So I just wanted to give a quick update. I think everybody knows that the state's comprehensive climate action legislation passed. And within that new legislation, there was the provision that 10 communities who had originally, the concept was 10 communities that had filed for home rule to allow for all new construction to be fossil fuel free was included in the legislation. Concord, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, sent a letter of intent from the select board and the town manager to the state, to DOER, requesting that we still be considered a pilot, one of the 10 pilot communities. That pilots are opening up. The city of Boston now wants to be in, Somerville wants to be in this pilot. It's not a completely done deal that Concord would be in for a number of reasons, but Concord did submit a letter of intent to be included in the 10 community pilot.
Yeah, and I can distribute that to the board later on today, that letter from Concord to the state. But yes, thank you. I missed that in my chair's update. Pamela Dritt.
Pamela, 13 Concord Green. I thought right now the state of the art is that all solar installations need to be accompanied by battery backup. And we should start, I think, considering that that is part of a solar installation's cost, because it allows us to have no limits on the amount of solar that we put in, which is good. And Tony Seba has done a good study about the curve of solar and battery and where the sweet spot is for the amount that you put in for return on money. And I think we should all look at that and put solar over the parking lot in the high school. Why can't we do that?
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah, these are the questions we want to see answered in this report. And
I don't I don't think that we should put a citizen group on it,
Well, we've
like
made that,
Brian said.
I personally
It's
agree with
not
you,
too late.
but we've made that decision as a board to move forward with staff. So we're going to continue on that route. But your comment about storage with solar is accurate, but we
There's
need to look at the finances because the storage is expensive.
exactly, but it isn't though. If you look at the future benefit from it, it isn't. It's the investment that really pays off. We
Yeah,
can
so that
end
was,
up with generating all the power we need locally and not buying any from with
So-
superpower, really cheap extra power.
yeah, so thank you, Pamela. That was related to my question earlier about getting what are the metrics we're going to evaluate storage at, because that will account for those future values of avoided cost and other factors.
And
and
it's also the school bus batteries are battery storage for grid scale battery storage.
Right.
So
And
when we have all of the school buses electric, we will have battery storage.
and that effort's underway. So and if you want, I offline, I could tell you all about where we are on the vehicular grid, but
Let's get together.
know that it's underway. I do want to get to other questions to keep us on schedule. Dean?
Good morning. Thank you for this conversation this morning. It sounds like we are starting to get going, which is sort of a phrase, a turn of phrase there. We're starting to get going on this, which is good. Just a few scattered comments about the report we had this morning. I would counsel strongly against even making a run at that flat space at the high school. There are numerous groups at the high school who have functional uses for that space in mind, not just a track, a field house, a hockey rink. There are so many groups who have their eye on that putting solar panels is just another one, and it is unlikely to be able to edge those out. Especially when you look to the side and you have an entire parking lot that could use canopies. So I would just take that off your list. Unfortunately, it's a huge space, but it's probably unlikely to want to have solar over there. That's just my take on that piece. In your strategic plan for this year, batteries were on the list, and we don't have any funding. So because we didn't go to town meeting last year to ask for enough funding to get engaged with battery storage. So I strongly encourage hurry up and go to figure out what kind of funding you're going to want to get batteries going in the next fiscal. And that, you got short months to sort it out, but I do feel as though batteries are a critical component of all of this. And I want everyone to just take a look at public relations releases that Eversource has thrown out recently. They just turned on the lights on a 38 megawatt hour community battery out at Provincetown. That is because they have a 13-mile single point of failure cable that takes energy all the way out to Provincetown. And if that thing gets impacted by storms, the whole town goes out of lights. So they put a 38 megawatt battery out there so that they don't have to build a parallel 13-mile cable. So, and they also have been building ones at other isolated communities like Martha's Vineyard. So they've got two going on at Martha's Vineyard. So we should sort of look at those models for how we can, behind our substation, build a large scale, not 2 megawatts, but bigger scale battery installation to power our town and to move the duck curve. So that's a second problem. But I really do think that some kind of debt funding needs to be in this year's town meeting warrant articles to get us moving on battery storage. I'm very encouraged to hear that we'll have an outline for the report soon, because right now it's a scattershot. Here's where we can put stuff, or here's how we can feed energy back. I'd just like to start to see the structure of what we're going to be doing. And so I'm happy to hear that we're going to get that. So very pleased with this meeting today that we have, we're starting to sort of turn the crank and get this thing going. I'm disappointed to hear that it's this late. The warrant article was filed in January. We are 9 months since then. We are 5 or 6 months since April when the article was actually passed. And now we're thinking about having an outline for the report. So that seems like slow progress, but I'm happy to see that something is going to be done by the next meeting. Thanks. I'm all good.
Great, thank you. And I can forward that video the Dean mentioned for P-Town to the board, so you can watch it as well. Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to reassert that the contention that somehow the installation expenses for broadband between 2014 and 2022 or 2019, whenever that loan amount was determined to exist, that's factually incorrect. An examination of the budgets and the budget books and the town reports that were submitted during that time would demonstrate that in fact the installation, the so-called heavy capital expenses were being expensed as part of those budgets, and it's well documented. And I still haven't seen anything that actually represents work done to go back and examine those records and ensure that they are in fact, that those loan amounts are really right there. So I would encourage the board to, I know you have a very full plate, but don't just accept the notion that debt was incurred, because I really don't think the documentation exists for it. Though we were budgeting for installations, that was the primary expense during those years, and those bills were paid. So I know it's been a long meeting, but I just couldn't really let those assertions go by without challenging them again.
Thank you. David Allen.
Mark has taken us back to that part of the discussion of the financial statements. Building, if I can, from Laura's taking, shall I say, common sense view of this, particularly for some perspective. At the heart here, one of the core issues is, quote, the investment necessary to move things forward on telecom. We spent a few million dollars to start a telecoms company, for God's sake. It was nothing relative to what usually gets spent on these things. And frankly, that should lead us to have very great thanks to those who pulled off this rabbit out of a hat. It's damned important to have that perspective, the appreciation, but especially now, as Jason is leading this, spearheading this potentially greater expansion, we want to be darn sure that he's got support when he may need some further investment. We've already spent bukus on starting this thing, relatively speaking, for anybody who's got experience with these matters. We need to be ready, if necessary, to support with further investment should he identify it. Enough, and thanks.
Thank you, David. Mary.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, I'm really encouraged by the conversation you had today around Article 38, and I have an appreciation now for the complexity of the problem. Brian mentioned that you're going to be coming to the select board for an extension. And speaking as one select board member, I think having an outline that actually gives a framework for how you're going to move forward would make that extension a lot more palatable to the select board. So thank you for the work you're doing. I'm encouraged. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other public comments? Not seeing any. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yep, second.
Great. Roll call vote. Wendy,
Approved.
Pam,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Warren.
Approved.
I agree as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good morning.
Great. Thanks.
I know.
Bye.